Chapter 1. The Message in the Sky. The sun had been setting for hours, casting long shadows over a world that had once been a thriving paradise. Now it was something else, something different, something barely recognizable. Flickers of an aurora in the sky, unnatural, almost digital, but impossibly beautiful, stretched across the horizon. It wasn't the first time the colors had appeared, but tonight they felt more urgent, more like a warning. The temperature had been fluctuating wildly for days. 1 minute, the world was covered in heat. The next, it was an unearthly cold. The people of Earth had grown used to it, adapting in ways they never thought possible. Desperation had morphed into innovation. But tonight felt like something was about to change. Dr. Lila Connors stood at the edge of the cracked and dried lake bed, her boots scraping the dust. The message, the signal, had come through once again, an encrypted pulse from the deepest reaches of the galaxy. No one knew its origin. No one could decode it. It was a soundless, yet ever-present hum, vibrating in the very air itself. But today the hum was different. It echoed across the atmosphere with a weight that pulled at the soul. She had heard it in her dreams before. Her heart raced as she lifted her eyes to the heavens. And that's when she saw it. A shadow passed swiftly across the sky, larger than any storm cloud, darker than the night. But there was no wind, no sudden pressure change, no sound, just an enormous presence moving, unseen, unnoticed, and yet impossible to ignore. Her breath caught. It was coming closer. Lila's communication device buzzed on her wrist. She answered it, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Connors, you need to see this. The satellites just recorded something massive," said the voice on the other end. It was Gabe, her colleague back at the weather station. "Gabe, I'm not coming back. You need to look outside. It's here." She cut the transmission before he could respond, the device falling silent in her palm. But the sky? The sky was anything but. The aurora brightened as the shadow in the heavens grew, revealing sleek, alien shapes, a dozen of them, massive ships cloaked by the distortion of Earth's atmosphere, almost invisible yet unmistakable in their form. They were descending slowly, carefully, as though they had studied this planet for eons. The ships seemed to shimmer like mirages, their edges refracted by the changing air. Suddenly, a loud, deafening crack. The world trembled, sending ripples through the earth. It wasn't an explosion, not really. More like a sonic burst, but contained, controlled. And with it a voice that was not in her head, but in the air, woven into the very fabric of time and space itself. "What have you done?" The words reverberated across the plains, the cities, the oceans, and the mountains. Every living creature froze. The skies dimmed, the wind stilled, and in that frozen moment, Earth's greatest secret was laid bare. The aliens had arrived, not to conquer, not to explore, but to bear witness. They had seen the devastation. They had seen the rapid collapse of ecosystems, the wild temperature shifts, the dying seas and scorched lands. They had watched helpless. Their own homeworld had faced a similar fate eons ago. But it wasn't the climate that had destroyed them. It was the arrogance of those who didn't understand the balance of life, the balance between all things. Now, standing in their ships, looking down upon Earth, they were horrified, not by the violence of humanity's wars, not by the darkness of our greed, but by the tragic speed of Earth's dying heartbeat. "What have you done?" the voice repeated, this time gentler, a mix of awe and sorrow. The words echoed into the minds of every human, clear as day, leaving a trail of cold fear in its wake. Lila felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't sure if she was trembling from the overwhelming sound or the weight of realization. She wasn't sure if she was about to witness the end or the beginning of something entirely new. As the ships began their descent into the atmosphere, she could only think of one thing. The aliens weren't shocked by humanity's war. They were shocked by how quickly Earth's climate had spiraled beyond repair. And the terrifying question loomed. Had it already been too late? The ships lingered for only a moment before fading into the strange glowing fog, leaving Lila standing alone, the echoes of their voices hanging in the air. Behind her, the world was slowly starting to crumble, but somewhere in the distance, a new kind of dawn was just beginning to rise. But at what cost? Chapter 2: The Wake of Silence. The sky above had turned to molten amber, casting a strange glow over the land as though the sun itself had been siphoned of its color. For hours, the ships remained, hovering, silent, suspended like dark omens in the atmosphere. No one spoke. No one dared. Lila's hands were clammy, her breath shallow as she stood at the edge of the barren lake bed, staring up at the vastness. She wasn't sure if what she had seen was real or a fevered hallucination brought on by the intense pressure that hung in the air. But the weight was undeniable. The ships were there. She wasn't imagining it. A sudden noise behind her made her turn sharply. Gabe, breathless and wild-eyed, sprinted across the cracked earth towards her, his lab coat billowing like a flag of surrender in the windless night. What the hell is happening? His voice was strained with fear, but also with awe. I don't know. Lila's words came out in a strained whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the stillness. They've been here for hours. They're just waiting, watching. They know. Know what? Everything. What we've done. What's coming. It's not us they're afraid of, Gabe. It's the planet. He looked to the sky, his eyes locking onto the alien ships, their dark silhouettes barely visible against the swirling aurora. The quiet was suffocating. It was as if the entire world had held its breath, waiting for a signal, a command, or an explanation. Do you think they'll attack? Gabe asked, a tremor in his voice. Lila shook her head slowly. No, I don't think they're here to fight. But they're not here to help either. Not in the way we want. Gabe took a few hesitant steps forward, his gaze never leaving the ships above. Then why are they here? Before Lila could respond, a sudden pulse of light from one of the ships illuminated the landscape. The ground beneath them hummed with an energy they could feel deep in their bones. It was the same vibration she had felt earlier, that haunting echo. Only this time, it was more intense, stronger, raw. A voice reverberated in the air again, but this time, it wasn't just words. It was a flood of emotion, deep sorrow, but also an undercurrent of something more, something ancient. We have come to witness your world's final moment, and to understand what happened. The voice was not just heard, but felt like a pulse in the air, vibrating in the core of every human being. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if the words were meant for them specifically or for the entire planet, but they were loud enough to rattle the earth beneath their feet. A sound like a massive engine building in intensity filled the air as a circular hologram appeared before them, suspended like a window to another dimension. The image was distorted at first, flickering like static on an ancient TV, before it finally sharpened. Lila stared into the swirling chaos of images projected into the hologram. Flooded cities, raging wildfires, drought-stricken fields, entire ecosystems collapsing, creatures fleeing from their homes. Her breath caught in her throat. The hologram shifted again, showing footage of Earth, but this time it was from space, a distorted, warped version of their planet, not the blue and green orb they had known for centuries. This Earth was scarred, torn apart by storms, unnatural droughts, and the ever-encroaching desertification. An Earth that was suffocating from within. Then the image shifted once more, focusing on humanity itself. People running, fighting, fleeing. But there was something off. Their eyes, their faces, they were different. Desperate, frantic. It was as if they were fleeing not from each other, but from the planet itself, as though they knew it was too late to save it. "You have awakened us too late," the voice continued, now tinged with a deep, almost mournful sorrow. "You were meant to have learned, to have changed, but you did not." The hologram flickered again, showing a vast ocean, once teeming with life, now a graveyard of plastic and algae, suffocated by the heat. Lila's stomach turned. It was too real, too vivid. She could almost hear the cries of the creatures that once lived there, struggling in vain to survive. "What we sought to teach you, you ignored. What we warned you about, you dismissed." The hologram froze on a final image. A storm, a hurricane of unimaginable size, swirling over the planet. It was the kind of storm that could swallow entire continents, wipe away civilizations with ease. It was heading toward the Earth's last remaining sanctuary, the only place that had survived the ravages of climate change. And it was closing in. Lila looked up at the ships, her hands trembling. The message was clear. The aliens weren't here to stop the storm. They couldn't. They were here to learn, to understand. They had seen the same fate unfold in their own galaxy, their own world, eons ago. And now, Earth was repeating the same catastrophic mistakes, the same arrogance. But the aliens were not angry. They were not here for revenge. They were here to watch, to bear witness. Because, just like them, Earth's time had run out. Gabe staggered backward, his face pale, and Lila felt it too. The sickening realization that no matter what they did now, it wouldn't be enough. The ships were not here to save them. They were here to observe the final moments of a dying world. Lila took a deep breath. It wasn't just the planet that was dying. It was humanity's chance for redemption. And that, above all, was what the aliens feared. They had seen it before. The slow, inevitable collapse of civilizations that failed to understand the fragility of their existence. The pulse of light from the ships flickered again, drawing Lila's attention back to the hologram. The final message was clear, a warning etched into her very soul. "You are not the first, and you will not be the last." The ships began to ascend, fading into the swirling aurora above, their presence leaving behind a hollow silence. And in the distance, far across the desolate landscape, the storm grew closer. Chapter 3: The Last Echoes. The storm was coming. Lila stood frozen in the shadow of the dying landscape, her heart pounding as she watched the distant, swirling tempest. The winds were beginning to pick up now, though there was no cloud in the sky to explain the sudden rush of air. The air felt thick, charged with something primal, something ancient. The storm on the horizon wasn't just weather, it was a reckoning. Behind her, Gabe was on his knees, his hands gripping the cracked earth as if trying to hold on to something that could escape at any moment. The rest of the research team had gathered at a safe distance, all of them wide-eyed, speechless, staring at the ships as they disappeared into the rippling aurora above. But Lila couldn't focus on them. The message from the ships was echoing in her mind. "You are not the first, and you will not be the last." She understood now. It wasn't just the planet they were witnessing. It was the slow, inevitable collapse of an entire civilization, one that had ignored the signs of its own demise. The aliens, despite their power, despite their ancient knowledge, couldn't stop it. They could only watch, helpless and heartbroken, as another world succumbed to the same fatal mistake. "We don't have time." Gabe's voice broke through her thoughts, his words desperate. "Lila, we have to do something. Anything." The edge of panic in his voice was contagious, but Lila shook her head slowly. She didn't have an answer. "Not anymore. We've tried everything," she said softly, her eyes never leaving the storm that was rapidly growing in size. "We can't change this. Not anymore. Maybe we can?" Gabe was on his feet now, eyes wild, but there was something more in his gaze. Something like hope, or maybe denial. The message, there's got to be something in it. They came here for a reason, right? Maybe we can prove them wrong. Lila's breath caught. She wanted to believe that. She really did. But the signs had been there for decades, even longer. They had seen the rise of extreme weather patterns, the melting glaciers, the poisoned oceans. Every step they took to repair the damage had been too little, too late. The aliens had said it themselves. "You were meant to have learned." She glanced back at the research team. Some of them were in shock. Others were frantically recording data, trying to make sense of the alien presence. But the truth was settling in too quickly. They were witnessing something far beyond their comprehension. The end of an era. "We still have to try," Gabe insisted, his eyes searching hers. "The aliens didn't just show us this to give up. There has to be something we can do." Lila felt the weight of his words. The storm was closing in, but in that moment, a small, fragile spark of hope flickered inside her. Maybe the aliens hadn't come just to watch. Maybe they had come to offer something, a clue, a way out. She wasn't sure what, but she knew they hadn't arrived without a purpose. She took a step back, her mind racing. She needed to think. They needed to think. "Let's go back to the station," she said finally. "We'll analyze everything we've got. The signal, the message, the hologram. There's got to be a pattern, something we missed." Gabe nodded, but as he turned toward the others, his face was grim. "What if it's too late?" he asked quietly. Lila didn't answer. There was nothing to say. But as they made their way back to the research station, her mind was already working, processing every moment from the hologram. She couldn't shake the image of the final storm, that unnatural, towering storm, marching relentlessly toward the last sanctuary of Earth. As they approached the station, a flicker of motion in the sky caught her eye. She turned, heart racing, but there was nothing there. Nothing except a strange energy in the air, static, almost like the calm before a storm. When they reached the control room, the atmosphere inside was tense. Everyone was glued to their screens, monitoring the satellites and weather systems, trying to find something, anything, to indicate that there was still a chance. The storm was still building. The temperature was rising faster now. The ocean levels were climbing. The world was on the brink of something catastrophic, and the aliens were gone. They hadn't left a trace, except the weight of their words, hanging like a thick cloud over them. Lila sat at her station, her hands trembling as she accessed the encrypted pulse the ships had sent. It had to be here somewhere. There had to be something hidden in the transmission, some clue that would lead them to a solution. As the screen flickered to life, a new set of data began to appear, random bursts of numbers and symbols. The same encrypted pulse that had been sent out earlier, but now there was something more, something that made her freeze. A new transmission. It was almost like a code, too perfect to be human. And this time, it wasn't a voice that filled the room. It was a single image, a strange symbol, geometric and fluid at once. Something that looked like a cosmic spiral, pulsing with light. Lila's breath caught in her throat. "This is it," she whispered. Gabe was at her side in an instant, peering over her shoulder at the symbol. His eyes widened. "What is it?" "I don't know, but it's from them." She hesitated for a moment, then punched in a command, trying to translate the symbols. The screen shifted again, revealing a map of the planet. But it wasn't a map of Earth, not as they knew it. It was distorted, rippling with waves of color, like a digital projection. At first, it didn't make sense, but then Lila saw it, a pinpoint, a location, a place they hadn't even considered, a place deep within the heart of the storm. "That's where we need to go," she said softly. "That's where the key is." Gabe stared at the screen, his face pale. "We can't. It's impossible to reach there now." The storm. We don't have a choice, Lila said, her voice steady, despite the rising panic in her chest. It's the only way. And with that, they set off once more, their only hope tied to the cryptic map the aliens had left them. As the storm raged ever closer, they had one final chance to change everything. But time was running out. The final echoes of a dying world were growing louder. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Storm. The storm was no longer just a distant threat. It was upon them. Lila and Gabe stood at the edge of the research station, staring out into the night, the sky swirling with ominous energy. The air itself had thickened, the temperature dropping and rising in rapid, unnatural bursts. The wind was picking up now, gusts so strong they felt like they could tear through the very walls of the station. "Do you think we can make it there?" Gabe asked, his voice strained, his eyes darting nervously between the screen and the approaching chaos. Lila's mind was racing. The map they had deciphered wasn't just a location. It was a precise destination within the storm, deep within its epicenter, where the alien signal had emanated from. The pinpoint was clear, a remote island chain located just on the edge of the storm's path, a place that had been largely untouched by the devastation ravaging the rest of the world, a place that might hold the last hope of survival. But the storm was relentless. The holographic map had shown them a series of hidden energy readings radiating from that location, energy patterns that suggested something extraordinary lay beneath the surface of that unassuming chain of islands. Something ancient, something they had never seen before. "There are only hope," Lila muttered, more to herself than to Gabe. She glanced back at the rest of the team, who were gathered around the monitors, their faces pale as they tracked the storm's path. "How much time do we have?" Gabe asked, stepping closer to her. Lila checked the satellite feed once more. The storm was moving faster than they'd anticipated. It was closing in on the island chain, its winds now surpassing 400 miles per hour. The sea was already churning violently around it, and the atmospheric pressure was dropping rapidly. "Not much," Lila said, her throat tight. "Maybe hours, maybe less." "Then we don't wait," Gabe said, determination in his eyes. "We move now." They grabbed their emergency gear, running to the vehicles parked outside. The team was already preparing the choppers, loading them with supplies, all of them too silent, too afraid to speak. There was no time for doubt, no time to second-guess. They had no idea what they would find at the island chain, but the aliens' message had been clear. There was something there, something they needed to unlock. As Lila fastened her seatbelt, she couldn't help but glance up at the sky once more. The ships had gone, but the memory of their presence lingered like a ghost. She couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just come to witness Earth's end. They had come to guide, to show the way, but only if humanity was willing to listen, willing to act. The engine roared to life, and they took off into the darkening sky, the storm looming larger with every passing second. The wind was deafening as the helicopters cut through the turbulent air, the storm closing in faster than Lila had expected. Each gust felt like a slap against their fragile craft, and the once clear path to the island was now nearly impossible to navigate. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the jagged clouds, while the sea below churned violently, as though the ocean itself was trying to swallow them whole. "Stay focused," Gabe shouted over the roar of the wind, his hands gripping the controls tightly. "We're almost there." Lila clung to her seat, watching the instruments flicker and dim. The storm had begun to interfere with the communication system, and the GPS was on the brink of failing. The landscape had disappeared into a swirl of chaos. Black clouds, white lightning, and nothingness. Then, through the storm, she saw it. The island chain. It emerged from the dark sea like a forgotten relic, half submerged in the tumultuous waves, jagged cliffs rising out of the water. The storm raged around it, but somehow it stood unbroken. The pinpoint from the alien map had been accurate. This place had been untouched by the environmental collapse the rest of the world had endured. For a moment, Lila felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. "Straight ahead," Lila shouted. "We're almost there." But the moment she spoke, the storm seemed to shift. The air grew thicker, the wind stronger, and the sea seemed to rise up as if to stop them. The helicopter lurched violently to one side as the winds picked up speed, sending them spiraling off course. "We're losing altitude," Gabe yelled, his face set in grim determination. "Hold on." Lila gripped the edge of her seat, her heart hammering in her chest as the helicopter veered dangerously toward the churning sea. She could see the island now, so close, yet so far away. Every second felt like an eternity. With a sudden, jarring force, the helicopter bucked again, but this time, it didn't recover. The controls slipped from Gabe's hands, and Lila's vision blurred. She felt weightless for a moment, the world spinning around her. She closed her eyes as the ground rushed toward them, praying they wouldn't crash. And then, just as quickly as the chaos had begun, it stopped. They hit the ground with a violent thud, the helicopter skidding across the rough terrain of the island before coming to an abrupt halt. The world was silent for a moment, too silent. The storm continued to rage in the distance, but here, on the island, there was an eerie calm. Lila gasped for air, her chest tight, her body shaking with adrenaline. She glanced over at Gabe. He was alive, bruised, but breathing. "We made it," she whispered. But it wasn't the storm that had her attention now. Ahead of them, nestled in the center of the island, was a structure, ancient, monolithic, and entirely out of place. It was as if the storm itself had parted to reveal it, like some sort of forgotten temple, half buried in the earth. The energy they had felt earlier was stronger now, radiating from that very spot. Lila could feel it vibrating in her bones. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with awe. "This is what they were trying to show us." They grabbed their gear, and without another word, they moved toward the structure, every step filled with a sense of urgency. The storm might have been a natural disaster, but this was something else entirely, something that could change everything. As they approached the entrance, the ground beneath them began to hum. The stone doors, etched with strange symbols, slowly began to shift, opening with an ancient creak, as though welcoming them into the heart of the island. And then, with a final, resonating pulse, the air around them seemed to shift, as though the storm itself had been drawn in by the temple, like an electric charge. The ground began to vibrate beneath their feet, as though they were standing at the center of something far greater than any storm. Something was awakening. Chapter 5, The Last Revelation. Lila and Gabe moved cautiously toward the structure, their hearts pounding in sync with the rhythmic hum that resonated through the ground. The air was thick with tension, as though the very earth beneath them held its breath. The storm outside was raging still, but here, in the heart of the island, there was an unnatural calm. The doors of the ancient temple had opened slowly, their stone surfaces etched with glowing symbols that flickered intermittently, as if responding to the very presence of the two humans. Lila felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic force drawing her closer, urging her to step forward. "This is it," she whispered, more to herself than to Gabe. "Everything we've been fighting for. It was always here." The entrance led them into a vast chamber, its ceiling towering high above them. The walls were adorned with more symbols, some familiar, others foreign and alien in every sense. The air inside was thick, heavy with the smell of ancient stone, of dust that had accumulated for millennia. But it wasn't the scent that caught Lila's attention. It was the energy, the raw power that surged through the very walls of the structure, the same energy she had felt from the alien ships. At the far end of the chamber stood an altar of sorts, carved from the same dark stone that made up the walls. On it, a strange device pulsed with a soft, steady light, emitting a low hum that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Gabe stepped forward, his eyes wide with wonder. "What is it?" "I don't know," Lila replied, her voice filled with awe and trepidation. "But I think it's what the aliens were trying to show us. This could be the key." Her heart raced as she moved toward the device. It seemed to call to her, the glow intensifying as she approached. The symbols on the walls shifted, swirling like the storm clouds outside, and for a moment, everything seemed to blur around her. Lila reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the device. As soon as she made contact, a wave of energy coursed through her, sharp and electric. The symbols on the walls flared to life, lighting up the chamber in a brilliant, blinding flash. She gasped, stumbling back, but the pull was too strong. And then the voice came again, not through the air, but directly into her mind. "You are not the first, and you will not be the last." Lila's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the voice now. It was the same one she had heard from the alien ships. But this time it was not distant. It was inside her, close, personal. "We were like you once," the voice continued, its tone heavy with sorrow. "We destroyed our world. We failed to change. We watched as it died. And now, we witness yours." Lila's eyes filled with tears, her chest tight with emotion. The weight of the aliens' words, the echo of their own destruction, was overwhelming. The storm outside was no accident. It was a reflection of humanity's own choices, a manifestation of everything they had ignored for generations. But then the voice shifted, and a strange warmth filled her chest. "But there is still time," it said, "if you act now." Gabe looked at her, confusion in his eyes. "What does it mean? What's happening?" Lila could barely speak. The energy inside her was overwhelming. She could feel the pulse of the device beneath her fingertips, the ancient power thrumming through her like a heartbeat. "The storm," Lila whispered, struggling to find the words. "It's not just climate change. It's something deeper. The storm isn't just nature's wrath. It's an awakening, a warning from the universe." Gabe frowned. "A warning?" Lila nodded, her mind racing. The aliens didn't come just to watch. They came to stop it, to show us the path we missed. This device, it's the last remnant of their civilization. They used it to stop the end of their world. If we use it right, we can reverse the storm. Gabe stepped forward, his expression torn between hope and skepticism. "How do we use it?" Lila didn't have an answer. The alien voice had given her a glimpse, but it hadn't explained how. All she knew was that the device had the power to reset the balance, to shift the world back on its axis before it was too late. But there was one thing she understood. It wasn't about saving humanity alone. It was about saving the planet. The storm was a consequence of everything that had been done to the Earth, and this device could heal it, if they could unlock its secrets. As Lila moved closer to the altar, her fingers still lightly touching the glowing device, she felt a surge of warmth flood her veins. The symbols on the walls began to move again, the glow intensifying. The ground beneath them shook, and the device emitted a pulse that sent a ripple through the air. "The choice is yours," the voice whispered. "You can restore balance, or you can let it die." Lila took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. There was no turning back. She had come so far. She wasn't just fighting for humanity anymore. She was fighting for the world, for the future of everything that lived on it. Gabe reached for her hand, his voice hoarse. "Lila, are you sure?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with resolve. "We don't have a choice." With a final, decisive movement, she activated the device. The chamber erupted in light, blinding and brilliant, filling every corner of the room with an electric pulse of energy. Lila felt it course through her body, felt the storm outside respond to the power she had just unleashed. For a moment, the world stood still. Then, the storm began to dissipate. Outside, the wind slowed, the clouds parted, and the sky cleared. The roar of the hurricane faded into nothingness, replaced by a stillness that felt almost unnatural. It was as though the earth itself had exhaled, its tension released. Lila and Gabe stood in the center of the chamber, their bodies trembling from the energy they had just unleashed. The device, now dormant, pulsed one last time before going silent. "Did it work?" Gabe asked, his voice trembling with hope. Lila didn't answer immediately. She was still processing the immense change, the depth of what they had just done. She looked out toward the entrance, toward the island, the world. Slowly, she nodded. "We did it," she whispered. "We changed the course of history." But as the storm's final remnants faded into the distance, the voice returned, softer now, almost wistful. "You have chosen wisely. But remember, this is only one chance, one path. The balance can only be restored through understanding, through respect for the world that gave you life. Do not forget, Earth's future depends on your actions." The voice faded, and with it, the energy in the chamber died down. Lila and Gabe stood in the quiet, watching as the last traces of the storm disappeared, leaving behind a world that had been given a second chance. But as they stepped outside, they knew the real work was only just beginning. The end.